Basic Oracle database security. To be sure, information security in general and database security in specific constitutes many individuals' entire careers in IT. Accordingly, we have to pare down and discuss just what's necessary for our success on the exam and what is most closely related to our SQL skill set. To that end, in this nugget, I'm going to teach you how user accounts work in Oracle Database 11g. By the end of this nugget, you'll not only understand how to create and manage user accounts using a variety of first-party tools, but you'll also understand the AAA security model that comprises authentication, authorization, and accounting, and we'll learn best practices for applying privileges to user accounts, either directly or by use of something called roles. Oracle Database is a role-based system. Without any further ado, let's get started. Now then, let's formally define the user account in Oracle. A user account is an identity that's allowed into an Oracle 11g database, and ideally, I guess a user account isn't going to be much good unless that account is also granted some kind of privileges on one or more objects contained within that database. Now, previously, we flirted around with the subject of user accounts and how the user account in Oracle Database corresponds to the schema. We know that in Oracle nomenclature, schema refers to a collection of database objects that have been created or are owned by a single user. Therefore, many Oracle administrators equate the user account in Oracle with a schema. You might refer to, instead of the HR built-in user account, we could say the HR schema. Same with the built-in Scott account or any accounts that we create manually within the system. More seasoned Oracle vets, on the other hand, draw a distinction between an ordinary Oracle user account and a schema. That is to say, the vast majority of your database users, I would assume, are not going to make any changes to the data. They're just accessing line of business applications to retrieve data that already exists in those objects. In those cases, because those user accounts don't have the ability to do data definition language and create new objects in the database, those user accounts aren't formally schemas because they don't own any objects themselves. Once you grant a user account the ability to create objects, those new objects will be instantiated within that user's schema, and then I guess we could officially refer to that user account as a schema itself. Got it? Now then, most operating systems, specifically in Windows, you have a built-in administrator account, a built-in guest account. We have a number of built-in accounts with Oracle Database 11g. Remember, in this nugget we're focusing on the structured query language. I go into much more detail on how account security works in Oracle Database in my CBT Nuggets course on the DBA1 Fundamentals skill set. But for our purposes, we need to know the two main built-in administrative user accounts that come with any Oracle installation, and those are called sys and system. Now, what's the difference between sys and system? The main difference is that system is a slightly cut down super user account in which you can do just about anything database-wide, except doing things like backing up or restoring the database, performing a database upgrade, applying patches, this kind of stuff. So according to Oracle's own nomenclature, they recommend that if you're going to leverage a built-in administrative user, use system wherever possible. Sys contains not only all of the system privileges that system has, but also its chief distinction above system is that sys owns the data dictionary, which we're going to discuss later in this training. Now, as the owner of the data dictionary, if you log in as sys, you own the database completely. And if a malicious user were to compromise your Oracle Database's sys account, they could completely devastate the entire database if they wanted to. So at the very least, you want to make sure to protect both the sys and system built-in accounts with very strong passwords. Now, the idea of using system instead of sys for most of your administrative work corresponds to the IT security principle of least privilege. And what this means is we don't want to use either ourselves as DBAs, but even our database users, we don't want to use an account that's overpowered. That is to say, we want to use an account that has a proper level of access but is not overprivileged. The reason for this is simple. If the account is compromised by a malicious user, they will be able to leverage that account up to and including its level control of access in the system. Now, something that confuses many newcomers to Oracle is the sysdba special privilege. Now, this is a special, consider it an extra key to your user account's keychain that allows users to do everything that sys can do. In fact, when you log in as sys, Oracle requires that you invoke the sysdba privilege, and you do that by logging in using the string sys as sysdba. If you're a Harry Potter fan, it's the equivalent of a wizard putting on his or her magical cloak before entering the system. And what sysdba allows you to do specifically are very, very mission critical operations that would have, or that do have, I should say, dramatic impact on the running of your database. In other words, any user account that's been granted sysdba special privilege has the ability to start up or shut down the instance. Now, that is obviously potentially devastating if your business requires 100% uptime. Sysdba privilege also allows you to create new databases. Bottom line is, sys and system can apply the sysdba privilege. You have to manually grant sysdba to other accounts, and you want to be extremely careful when you do that. Now, the vast majority of our work with user accounts as Oracle DBAs will be in creating ordinary user IDs for our database users, maybe for our database developers and sub-administrative people. When we use the create user statement in SQL to create a user, we have to specify what kind of authentication is going on. Authentication refers to credential validation. It's where Oracle attempts to validate the identity of a connecting user. And the three options are as follows. We have create user by password, which is perhaps the most common way to create a user under general circumstances. And here we're creating a local account that exists in the data dictionary and only in the data dictionary. And Oracle encrypts the user's password so it's not all that easy to find out. And the user can change his or her password. We can apply password policy. Oracle 11g has come a long way with respect to maintaining strong passwords and even enforcing strong passwords and password policies for users. A little bit more on that in a moment. The second way to create a user is identified externally, and this is a pass-through authentication where we're using an operating system account or some identity outside of Oracle. And we assume that the connecting user, if they've authenticated to the operating system using their account, Oracle says, all right, I'll let you in. Globally takes that a step further. Create user identified globally. This is where we're linking a user account into an Enterprise Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP, directory system. This could be Oracle's own Internet Directory, or OID as it's called. It could be the Mac OS X's Open Directory. It could be commonly in Windows environments, Microsoft's Active Directory. And again, the idea with both externally and globally is to provide as close to a single sign-on or SSO solution as possible. Nothing seems to tick users off more than either A, they're having to change their password regularly, and even more complex, having to manage different passwords, different user accounts for different systems. That becomes a nightmare not only for your user population, but also for your help desk folks, and yes, even as us as database administrators and database developers. Let's have a look at the syntax in SQL for create user. The only part that's absolutely mandatory is what I've bracketed here. We obviously need to use the DDL statement create user and then provide the name for the user account identified by, and then we have our clause. Either we provide a password directly, which is creating a local Oracle user, identified externally, or identified globally. That establishes the user, and then afterwards you can use alter user to make changes to other properties of that user. It depends on whether you want to do those properties at creation or later. Better to do it during creation in my personal experience. Let's take a look at some of the other sample options here for setting up a user. You can set a default table space. Now, you'll find that Oracle chooses a system-wide default table space. You can set that in the database's initialization parameters. You can override that using, as I said, default table space. In a nutshell, a table space provides disk storage space for that user if they're going to create objects using DDL. We also can establish quota limits on table spaces to make sure that users don't run away and consume too much disk space that we just don't think they should exceed, right? Temporary files are a way of life in computing. Same thing with managing objects and running SQL SQL and so forth in an Oracle database environment, we have an initialization parameter that's instance or database wide that sets a temporary table space ID for a user, but we can override that by using temporary table space in our create user or alter user statements. Profiles we talk about in the DBA1 training. We don't need to get into this for SQL fundamentals, but profiles allow you to establish password policies, which are crucial because when you think about it, especially with local users, the password is the only thing that's protecting the user from compromise. So if we create a profile that enforces password complexity, enforces password history, minimum password length, password expiration, then we are, at least it is hoped, minimizing the likelihood of a breach. Password expire is a good thing to do when we're creating a user initially. This allows us to give the user a starter password, and then the first time the user attempts to log into Oracle, they'll be forced to choose a password on their own. Obviously, we don't want to, as database administrators, know what the user's passwords are. It's interesting, in my industry experience, how many users whom I've helped who assume that systems administrators know their passwords. Comes as a surprise to them to learn that they don't, or that we don't know their passwords in most cases. Create user, like any DDL statement, can be executed using a variety of first-party Oracle tools. Using the command line and SQL+, we can use SQL Developer, which we've been using in this training quite a bit. And also, this is new, I'll introduce you to this tool in this nugget. Oracle has given us a web-based and HTTP server-based interface to our database for quite a few product versions. It's called Oracle Enterprise Manager, sometimes called OEM, and this is yet again another way to do most of your database administration proper. It also gives us a nice insight not only between the graphical user interface, which can make things easier to get from point A to point B, but also allows us to see the underlying SQL. This is especially important for us who are learning the language and preparing to pass our Oracle SQL Fundamentals 1 test. Now you'll see how this works in the upcoming demo in Technicolor, but using the create user statement to define a new Oracle user is not enough to get them even connected into the Oracle database. We have to grant that user what are called privileges. And now I'd like to take a very brief pit stop to discuss the AAA model in information security. What the AAA stands for is, first, authentication, which we've already defined as credential validation. Is the connecting user who he or she says they are? The second A assumes that we've already taken care of authentication. The middle A stands for authorization, or auth as it's sometimes shortened. That's what we're dealing with right here with privileges. The idea is the user's been granted access to the system, they've crossed that threshold. Now, given that fact, what are the resource limits for that specific user? That's authorization. The third A is beyond the scope of this training. We deal with it in the DBA1 skill set, is accounting. And accounting deals with auditing, making sure that changes, accesses, successful accesses, failed accesses, DML, DDL statements, whatever our security policies mandate are tracked, that information is in fact logged, such that not only in the event of a breach we can go back to our audit trail and investigate what's gone wrong, but we can also keep that information for historical record, sharing with stakeholders, etc. Now, what about auth, or authorization? Privileges. We have two varieties of those privileges, system and object. System privileges are, as the word system would lead us to believe, instance or database wide. So they go across the entire Oracle installation. They're pretty far-reaching, so the bottom line is you want to be extremely careful with how you dole these out. Now, every user is going to need to be able to connect to Oracle to even access or log into the system, so everybody will need at least some system privileges. If a user will become a schema, we will also leverage some DDL-related system privileges. Object privileges assume that the user can already connect into the database. It doesn't assume that the user has DDL, but basically object permissions apply to specific schema objects. Traditionally, our DML, our data manipulation language statements. Are we going to, after we allow a user to connect, can we let that user select against one or more tables in one or more schemas? As long as we're applying these privileges as a super user, like system or sys, we can grant or revoke privileges across any schema. An individual user, let's say a schema owner, can grant or revoke privileges on his or her objects, but unless they've been granted privileges outside of their schema, they have access control privileges, I should say, only to their own schema. Specifically in SQL, the three statements we use to control privileges are grant, with grant, and revoke. Sharp users will recall these as our DCL, or data control language commands. Grant gives a permission or gives a privilege. Revoke does exactly the opposite. It removes a privilege from a user or a role. With grant takes a little bit more discussion. Essentially, with grant allows a privilege to be passed on. That is to say, let's say user Tom owns a table and he grants select to Tracy, and he grants that select with grant. This gives Tracy not only the ability to select against Tom's table, but she can give Carl the ability to select against Tom's table as well. So with grant gives delegation privilege. You want to be extremely careful in how you're granting this. You want to, in my opinion, keep things as simple as possible. If you're doling out with grant, sometimes it can be a lot more complex in your auditing scheme to figure out who's on first, as it were. Now, privileges apply directly to users. However, because Oracle, as I stated earlier, uses something called role-based access control, it's going to be a lot easier for you to use roles and apply privileges to roles, and then take those roles and apply those to users. You're wondering, okay, tell me more. What's a role? Let's discuss that next. A role in Oracle Database 11g is a collection of one or more privileges, and these privileges can be system and or object. The role itself is a schema object. It exists in the data dictionary, and it's used to provide easier access, or access control to be more specific, to your user population. Look at it this way. You might have 20 users who all have similar access needs within your Oracle database. If you're a glutton for punishment, you can run the appropriate grant statements individually for each of those users. Yippee-ki-yay, that's wonderful. But what would be better, in my opinion, and is better in my industry experience, is to create a role that has those privileges already assigned to it, and then assign the role to each user. Now, at first blush, you might think, well, wait a minute now. How is that saving me time? I'm still granting the role to each user. What's the difference? Well, things can get complex because you're not granting, in most cases, just a single privilege. You may have a basket load of privileges. So if you have 5 or 6 grants per user, do you want to run those 5 or 6 grants per user and then manage those over time if you need to, say, revoke one of those privileges? Or would you rather have a one-stop shop, namely the role, where you can grant or revoke once, and once you've granted the role to each user, you don't have to mess with each user henceforth. You can make adjustments only to the role. I hope you understand what's going on there. Now, Oracle gives us a number of default or built-in roles. The 3 standard ones that you need to know for your test are Connect, Resource, and DBA. And they go from soup to nuts in terms of Connect grants only the ability to log into Oracle. You can't see any object, you can't select any object, you can't do anything but log in. Obviously, we're going to need that role, but it's limited in terms of what you can do beyond connection. Resource is a built-in role that gives the user pretty much everything they need to do DML and DDL database-wide. Many DBAs, including myself, think that this is over-privileging a user. Chances are your best practice is going to be to create custom roles where you know exactly what is privileged and what's not for that role. DBA is a super user role that sys and system both have by default. You can make a user a DBA simply with one statement, grant DBA to username. You want to be extremely careful in doling this out. Your DBA team is obviously going to need the DBA role, so this is a good one. The workflow for using roles in Oracle is as follows. You grant privileges to the role, Get the role set up just so, or roles. You may have a number of roles with kind of a tiered level of access to the system. And then once your roles are all set up, you then use grant again to grant roles to appropriate users. In this demonstration, we'll work with security, basic database security in Oracle 11g. Specifically, I'm going to show you how to create users, manage roles, and grant and revoke privileges. I'm going to start a session, a SQL worksheet session, as the sys super user. I'm going to copy and paste our demo script text. Remember, you can download all of our demos. Here's what we have going on. I'm going to create 3 users in a row. I'm going to issue 3 separate create user statements. One called res user, to which we're going to give the resource role. Another one called select, that we're going to manually grant privileges to, cell user I should say, not select. And then we'll create a user called drop me that we'll use for a drop exercise momentarily. All 3 of these are local accounts, and I'm only specifying the very basics here. Identified by, and then the password, which in this case is kind of a funkified version of the word password. And then I'm assigning their storage to be in the users table space, and the temp is their temporary table space. Like I said, pretty straightforward stuff here. Oracle had no problems creating those users. If we want to modify the properties of a user using SQL, it's simply a case of using alter user username and then apply whatever properties you want to. To verify that change, I'm going to shift our focus to the graphical user interface just to show you both. And in the sys schema, let me scroll down to the bottom of the list. Under other users, there's our drop me user. We'll right click, edit user, and as a sys user, or as sys I should say, I can do anything to this account. I can reset its password, I can lock the account for security reasons, I can change its default table space, temporary table space. Over to quotas, you notice that we have 10 megabytes, or actually I think I did 100 megabytes on the user's table space, and that sure enough is showing up here just like it should. The SQL gives you the DDL behind that user, and we haven't yet talked about roles or privileges yet. We'll talk about that in just a minute. If we want to drop a user, we can just simply do drop user drop me. That user does not exist anymore. Again, we can verify that by refreshing the view, coming down. Drop me is no longer in the data dictionary. It's gone. Now, what if we want to log in as cell user or res user? How do we do that? Well, why don't I fire up an administrative command prompt here and log into SQL Plus as that user. Your user, if they're on their own machine, will be able to access SQL Plus if and only if you've installed the Oracle Client software. I cover Oracle Client installation in my CBT Nuggets course on DBA1. You don't need to know anything about it for the SQL Fundamentals test. But the Oracle Client, which is freely downloadable from Oracle's website, enables access, client access to the SQL Plus command line tool. We're asked for the password, which I will supply, and we're surprisingly or not allowed into Oracle. It tells us Aura 1045 error that the user res user lacks the create session privilege, logon denied. So we're going to have to grant create session to this user before they can even log in. And I'll do that now just for grins. To grant is just as simple as using grant and then the name of the privilege, create session. If I wanted to grant more than one privilege at once, we can just do that via a comma-separated list of system and/or object privileges. System privileges like create session, in some cases, don't take any additional arguments. I mean, either you can create a session or you can't. So I complete this with to res user. Grant succeeded. So now if we come back to SQL Plus, I can try to authenticate again. Res user, put in my password, and I'm now in. I can select user from dual, but I can't do anything else. Even accessing the data dictionary views to which I should have full access, such as user objects, you notice that we don't get anything back. How about if we do a select star from all objects? Here we are getting stuff back. Of course, the output looks terrible in SQL Plus, but it looks like we are able to access some stuff. Basically, what's flashing by in a really quick way are references to the public user. Public is equivalent to the everyone special identity in Windows operating systems, but you want to be careful how you're using public and what resources or what schema objects are granting access to public. That's certainly a big least privilege issue that we need to consider. Okay, so now REST user can connect and can also access any objects to which public is assigned privilege. If we want to give REST user some abilities here, some DML abilities, some DDL abilities, we can grant resource, which is a built-in role to REST user. Simple statement here executed as sys, and now suddenly, automatically, I'm hitting Control-C to stop the running of that. Host CLS to clear the screen. At this point, I should be able to do basic DDL and DML statements. Now I issued a create table and it gave me an insufficient privileges error. Perhaps we need to refresh our access token. Let me disconnect my session and then connect REST user again. Create table REST table. Call 1, number 4, and the table's created. So that's what it was. I had an outdated access token I needed to re-authenticate. Now, can I access objects in other users' schema? Can I run, for instance, select star from scott.emp, the emp table in the Scott schema? Nope. Table or view does not exist. So resource is allowing us DDL on our own stuff and DML on our own stuff. That is to say, I can run select star against REST table all day long. Of course, I'm not going to get anything back. I can insert into REST table all day long and then select those rows. There it is right there. But again, we're being very cautious, taking baby steps in what we're granting to other users. So we're playing around right now with granting privileges, system privileges and object privileges one by one to individual users. Now, to make grants on that new table, we can do this either as sys or we can do it from REST user because we own this table. We can run grant, I'll just do select and insert on REST user.rest table. I'm just using the fully qualified name for that object to cell user. That grant succeeded. Now cell user doesn't have any system privileges assigned to it yet. So why don't I grant resource and connect to cell user so cell user can log in. I'm going to disconnect as REST user and connect as cell user. Put in my password. Tells me that cell user lacks create session privilege. Well, forgot about that. These privileges are a slippery thing, aren't they? So we grant create session to cell user. We now should be able to come in, and we are. And let's try to select against REST user.rest table, which we're able to do. We also should be able to insert, shouldn't we? Good deal. All well and good so far. Now, how about delete? What about this statement? Delete from REST user.rest table where col1 equals 300, insufficient privileges. So Oracle is doing a good job at managing our grants. Now we can cut down what cell user can do. I'll ping pong back. Actually, I'll do this as the sys user. We can use, instead of grant, revoke. I'll revoke insert on REST user REST table from cell user. Revoke succeeded. So at this point, cell user's net privileges should be select on the REST table. Let's come back and update our token by disconnecting and connecting again. Make sure we can still select. We'll try and insert. And again, we get insufficient privileges. So those are the basic mechanics of grants and revokes. Again, we can do all this through the graphical interface. A couple different ways, actually. Why don't I mosey on over into Oracle Enterprise Manager, which, as we've discussed, is the web front end to Oracle Database 11g. You can get to Oracle Enterprise Manager, assuming that you've installed it, through the Start menu or the command line, depending upon your operating system. On Windows, it's really easy. There's a shortcut here, a browser shortcut called Database Control that will take you to that particular website. Once you've logged in, you can navigate your database via these sheet tabs. The one that we're interested for user account security is the Server tab. And if you look here on the second column Third column, second row, under security we can look at users, roles, profiles, etc. Why don't we select users? Gives us everybody by default, but we can customize that. We can filter our view to just put in a specific object name, and it gives us all sorts of metadata regarding the selected user. Now we can click the user directly to see what's going on, what roles to which we've been assigned. At this point, I granted the select user or cell user the resource role. They also have create session, object level privileges. We have select for rest user, rest table without the grant option supplied. Now if we hit return, we can do a whole bunch of other things through the graphical user interface. We can edit, which is the same thing as clicking the username. We can view, delete. We can expire the password. We can generate the DDL that was used to create that user. We can lock or unlock the user. Actually, view and edit are different. Edit actually gives us control over all aspects of that user, where we can reset their password, and then we can get into specific system privileges, object privileges, quotas, etc. Bottom line is you can do it all through the Oracle Enterprise Manager interface, and what's cool here is that you can hit Show SQL, and as long as you've made at least one change, you can see those changes, what they look like in the structured query language itself. Now let's come back here. I'll run a host CLS to clear the screen, and I'm going to select user from the dual virtual table just to verify that I am logged in as cell user. How would a user, an ordinary user, logged into SQL Plus change their password? That's a common question that an Oracle DBA should be able to answer with ease. The easy answer to that question is that all the user has to do from SQL Plus is issue the SQL Plus command password, and it's just really as simple as that. You know the drill. We put in our old password, put in a new password, confirm that new password, and the password is changed. As simple as that. Let's complete this demonstration by looking at roles, how to create a role, how to customize a role, and grant a role to a user. Pretty straightforward stuff with SQL. To create a new role is as easy as specifying create role and then giving the role a name. I'm creating a role here called basic DML, and what I'm going to do here is again pass in a comma-separated list of both system and object privileges. Now you notice the syntax here. The any keyword is awfully helpful if you want to apply permissions to more than one object or object type at once. Now you can do this per schema or per database. This is a pretty broad stroke role that's going to grant anybody who has this role granted to him or her the ability to select against any table in the database, insert on any table in the database, update any table, or delete any table. And all we're doing here is again using the grant statement. In this case, we're granting not to a user, but to a role. Now, all we have to do to give all of these permissions in one fell swoop to an Oracle user is to apply grant again, this time granting the role to a specific user. Boom. It's as easy as that. So at this point, cell user, I'm going to again refresh my token, especially with my new password. See, I'm now able to select against any object in any schema. There's Scott.emp, and there's my results. Simple as that. Again, the graphical user interface through the Oracle Enterprise Manager. On the Server tab, we have a section for roles where you can customize those roles. I just created one called basic_DML, and we can filter our list like so, and we can edit it through the graphical interface just as easy as can be by navigating to System Privileges, which as you see we can insert, update, select, or delete any table, and then object privileges. Now if we wanted to customize this a little bit, we can click Edit List, and the Edit interface in Oracle Enterprise Manager is pretty cool because it shows you all of the available privileges. This is an excellent learning tool for you, no question about it. I'm going to cancel out of there and we'll navigate to Object Privileges. The way this works is where it says Select Object Type, you choose what kind of securable object that we're going to grant permissions to, click Add, and then it simply asks us what's the schema name, what's the table name. It might be Scott.emp, and we want to grant select. Obviously, this is a little redundant because we know that we're already granting the ability to select across all schemas, but I just want to show you what this looks like here, that we can be very granular and we can even browse. That's what this little flashlight icon allows us to do. If we don't remember what an object's name is, all we do need is the schema. So I can choose a schema from the list here. Why don't I choose HR for grins, click Go, and and now it gives me a run of all of the tables in that specific schema. I can make a selection here and it comes back. Simple as that. Click OK. And before you apply any changes in Oracle Enterprise Manager, as I said, you can click Show SQL to show exactly what's going on. So it looks like in this case, we're granting specific object level privileges. Select on HR.departments and also on Scott.emp to the basic DML role. Final thing I want to show you, again, a graphical approach, is that in the appropriate connection, in the appropriate schema, we can also select a user, say cell user, right-click, edit user, and we can manage roles from here as well, very easily actually, with just a check. And admin here refers to the with grant. So if I want to give cell user the ability to grant this role to other users, we can just put a check in the admin column. Note that we can also grant system privileges directly. Here, instead of admin, it's just called admin option. And there you have it. The basic mechanics of user access security and roles in Oracle Database 11g. Basic Oracle Database Security Review. In this nugget, we looked at user account security in Oracle. I think you have a pretty nice understanding of how to create and manage user accounts in Oracle 11g. We understand the create user statement and its various ramifications and properties. We know how to grant and revoke privileges, and we even understand how to leverage roles to ease our administration of these user accounts and shield their access to our system using the principle of least privilege. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.